fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. We are back. Joe Simons, like diamonds. Another episode here. This is going to be a fun one, maybe an alarming one. I know it was for me when I started reading into this. Michelle had reached out to me. Her husband is one of our insider members. And she's like, do you know anything about the Stony coral tissue issue? And I said, I've heard of it, but I don't even know what it means. And I start reading up on it. And I start seeing things like it's, this disease that's spreading amongst coral. They don't really know exactly where it started. They have some ideas. It's spreading like crazy fast. It's waterborne instead of airborne. And there's no real stopping it yet. There's, some kind of AK vaccines, at least for these coral, where they're attempting to stop it and slow it down and to save coral. And they're trying to segregate coral from the bad coral. I was like, this is just too eerie with everything we have going on. So I reached out and said, all right, we have to get someone on here to talk about this. And she recommended the main man at the top, Andy Walker from the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Joe, thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be here this morning.
And for those of you that are watching this, because I know a lot of people watched on YouTube, what's going on behind you? That's such a cool backdrop.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this. This is a collection of corals that have been rescued out of the waters down in the Florida Keys because they would be very vulnerable to stony coral tissue loss disease, which we'll certainly talk in depth about. And as you said, the disease has moved so quickly that the only thing we could do is try to rescue as many corals as possible and hold them for a while we figure this thing out.
So where did this whole stony coral, what's the name? What's behind all this?
Yeah. So first thing, folks, I'm sure some of your members are very aware, but others who may not spend a lot of time in Florida may not. Florida possesses the third or fourth largest coral reef in the world. We think about coral down in the Keys, but it actually extends all the way up, halfway up the east coast of Florida to the Port St. Lucie Inlet. It's about 360 miles long. Only the Mesoamerican Reef in Central America and the Great Barrier Reef in Australia are really much longer. And in 2014, just about 6 years ago, some divers off the port of Miami on Virginia Key noticed a lot of the corals were turning white and dying, something they had never seen before. And we still, to this day, because coral biology is so weird, we still don't know whether this is a virus or a bacteria causing it. We suspect a bacteria. Probably, my guess is from another part of the world, by the way it's interacting with corals here, because they don't seem to have resistance. And it spread in the 5 years all the way across the whole 360-mile reef tract, to the point now that it's only out on the very western tip of the reef out in the dry Tortugas that is currently disease-free. And at the same time, it's spread into the Caribbean. At least 10 island nations have it now, and even to the Mesoamerican Reef itself off the coast of Mexico and Belize.
And I've lived in Florida, born here, been living most of my life here. And I remember, hearing and reading about some kind of diseases that kind of came and went. Normally they're very, isolated, and they certainly don't last 5 years, right? They just kind of come and go. So this is, it's crazy how this is similar to COVID, where it's just like keeps spreading and it just won't stop. And remember when COVID first came out, we all thought, as soon as it gets warm, everything's going to go away. And that didn't happen. And you guys are having the same issues there with your water temps. Maybe that was going to change it, and it just keeps going and going and going.
Very much so. Our foundation, which is called the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida, a lot of what we do is support of the state wildlife agency, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, as it's known. And they actually brought this to our attention a couple of years ago when they decided they were going to try to rescue as many corals as possible while other scientists tried to figure out what this disease was and how to treat it. And so we're a nonprofit. We raise money to help for things like this. So we got very involved on the fundraising side, and we, with some of our corporate partners, were able to create the first holding facility specially designated for this. And about 40% of all the 2,000 rescued corals to date are being held in this facility. But corals are now being held by, at last count, I think 19 facilities across 13 states, from Iowa to New Jersey. And Tennessee and Virginia are going to be taking some corals soon. And the idea is we'll keep these corals safe. We'll learn how to propagate them, make sure they don't die in our care. Some of these have never been in human care before, so we're learning as we go, and all the facilities working together. And in the meantime, we're trying to, as I said, figure out the source of the disease, how to treat it. But also long term, what we really are going to have to do is breed these corals to have resistance to the disease. So one of the big next steps is to get back out into the water and look for corals that have survived this, and bring them into the lab and try to and start breeding them. So we'll have two aims with breeding. One is to increase genetic diversity to its maximum. So the corals may develop, natural resistance just through their breeding. And the other case is to very consciously take survivor corals and try to breed them with these rescued corals, and and then test and see if we've developed some resistant strains.
So I know this is a fast spreading disease that's happening underwater. Is this a fast killing disease? Meaning, are these corals just like dying super fast, or is it over a year or 2 or 3? I don't know.
Well, and that's the other reason why I suspect this has been brought in unwittingly on a boat, from the Pacific through the Panama Canal or something like it. Corals are dying within a matter of a week or two.
Oh, wow.
Or at most maybe 3 or 4 weeks. So you can have a 100-year coral that survived every other possible thing out there, hurricanes, anything you name, and suddenly just being wiped out. And that's why rescuing corals was so important. There are 45 species of stony corals. So these are the big brain corals, the star corals, pillar corals that really are the basic building blocks of the reef, literally the backbone of the reef. And so, when they die, the reef also physically collapses because there's nothing really to keep these corals together. So all the fisheries suffer, greatly. They're dependent on those reefs. So we're hoping that this breeding will allow us to go back to some of these big dead brain corals and actually glue living tissue back onto them and really accelerate regrowth once we feel we have some viable corals. Interesting.
So let's maybe take a step back for a listener who's wondering, all right, why should we care? Why are the reefs so important? Why is coral important? Sure.
Yeah. Well, it's a really good question. Coral only occupies about 2% of the oceans of the world, but 25% of all sea life depends on the reefs at some stage of its life or other. Fish, when they're small, using the reef to hide out, or maybe the flats behind the reef system.
Yep.
A good 10 or so of our principal game fish here in Florida, depend on the reefs. And then, some of the bigger predator fish are hunting along those reefs too. So our fishery here, which is on the recreational side alone, an $8 billion a year industry in Florida, long term really is not going to look anywhere near the same if the reefs, if we can't bring the reefs back from this near collapse.
And so when you guys are doing your your dives and taking samples, are there some types of corals? I know you mentioned a few different types. Are there some that are kind of immune to this, like where you're seeing some areas that just look normal,
Right.
or is it just kind of like a devastation everywhere you look in certain areas?
Yeah, it depends on what corals we're talking about. So, of the 45 species of stony corals we have here in Florida, 22 of them are vulnerable to the disease.
22 out of 25?
Out of 45.
Oh, out of 40.
So
Okay.
half.
Got it.
So it's
Okay.
half. And the mortality among those 22 species, to answer your question, approaches 100% in many places.
Wow.
So if you're in a part of the reef where those 22 species dominate, yes, that portion of the reef will look entirely dead or very close to it. So it's been estimated that the percent of coral cover down in the Florida Keys was about 30% along the reef, because you have a lot of things on the reef, just not coral. And in most places now it's down to 2%. So there's a lot of optimism. We're learning so much quickly about growing corals. A lot of optimism in the long term, but we certainly have our work cut out for us.
Is it slowing at all?
Well, we're going to start testing to see how virulent it remained. FWC is working on putting together the funding right now for doing some test outplantings along the whole length of the reef to just monitor for the disease and and see if it's as strong as it was originally. And so, it's still spreading quickly. Some of your listeners from the Northeast will remember years ago, the gypsy moth when it came into the country and how it decimated the woodlands, the first few times that it swept through. And then things kind of evolved, some resistance, some predators were introduced to gypsy moths, things like that. And the forest recovered. And so the hope is that with a little help here, nature will take its course and the disease will slow and become less toxic as we adapt corals and as corals adapt on their own.
So talk to me about, you mentioned the word glue. So you actually take some of like these healthy ones and you glue them back onto the reef? Yeah.
This has been done for years with some of the branching corals that will often get broken off in hurricanes and things. Divers, many volunteer divers, in fact, will go down and glue the corals back together before the broken corals are buried in the sand and die. So they'll come in after a storm and do that type of restoration. So the science and technology behind gluing corals, live corals back together and restoring the reef through that way has been well worked out. We just need tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of resistant corals to be bred so that we have the raw material.
Yeah. And so the ones behind you, I saw the term was putting these, healthy corals, and you guys are, essentially it's something that you should never do, by the way, if you're just a recreational diver, is to go down there and you're kind of chipping away or cutting out some of the ones that have not been infected and putting in these condos. Is that technically what you guys are kind of doing?
Yeah. It's the sort of thing you need permits to do, obviously. Most of these were collected by FWC and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. As I said, out of the Keys, and then they're genetic. They're being cataloged genetically, so we know we can breed coral A with coral B and not lose track of what we did. But as you can see, they're all different species behind me, all doing very well in these tanks, and we just have to figure out the master game plan for how you breed 2,000 plus corals together to come up with what you want.
Because that's a slow process?
That's a good question. We actually, our foundation's been tapped by the Department of Environmental Protection here in Florida to oversee developing that plan. our no one in our foundation, me included, are coral experts. But we're confident we're going to find the right people to put together that plan, as well as the entire restoration strategy for Florida's coral reef.
Cool. And talk about your foundation too, and where you guys fit in. I think most of our listeners, especially the ones here in Florida, have heard of FWC.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you guys fit in with all of this, and where do you get the funding, and how does it all work?
Sure. Well, again, we're the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida, and we were created by the legislature 26 years ago to support FWC and its partners, not only in conservation, but also in outdoor recreation and traditional outdoor activities, including fishing and boating. And we have 5 main initiatives, of which restoring coral is one. But we're also generally working on conserving wildlife, from panthers to birds and black bear. We support a lot of hunting programs, hunting safety programs, youth programs. Florida runs probably the largest youth network in the country, called the Florida Youth Conservation Centers Network, and it's administered out of FWC. And almost 300,000 kids have outdoor experiences here in Florida every year, thanks to this network. So we're the largest private funder of scholarships and other things for those camps. And then we work on invasives. So whether it be lionfish or Burmese pythons, we try to support research and control methods for things like that. Our motto is conserving nature and our outdoor heritage. And we see stony coral tissue loss disease and coral reefs as being both of those, both our outdoor heritage and solid conservation work.
Oh, yeah. So this is year 5 that this has been happening. Is that right?
That's right. Late 2014. So we're just hitting our 6th anniversary.
Okay.
But it had spread in the first 5 years everywhere.
So let's just say it finally kind of stopped, slowed down. How, I mean, you guys, this is obviously another 5+ years, right, to kind of rebuild. And this is not something that just happens overnight.
Yeah, the coral reefs around the world have been subject to a lot of stresses. Everything from boats unintentionally drifting into them, inexperienced divers banging into reefs, anchors, storms, bleaching events, which is usually caused by unusually hot weather leading to unusually hot water. Florida's experienced all of those. And some people wonder if, the corals were already somewhat weakened by dealing with some of these other stresses. But, regardless of that, I think that as I said, again, I think the prognosis is good long-term, but it is long-term. I think when you're talking about a 360-mile long reef, and the scale we're going to work, the National Park Service.
Miles?
Yeah. National Park Service has picked 7 reefs in the Florida Keys that are calling the Iconic Reef Program, where they're going to start restoration. We will be determining with FWC and DEP other sites along the reef. But there's a lot of science behind this, because the way corals propagate, corals have to be very close to one another to propagate. They can't be 100 yards apart or half a mile apart necessarily. So we'll have these restoration clusters, and then slowly over time, if all goes well, we'll be able to add to them, and they'll also naturally colonize adjacent areas. Cool. So we're talking, frankly, decades, but I think we could make a lot of remarkable progress, in 5-year spans of time. You
had mentioned this reef here off of Florida, where this is the area that's been infected. It's one of the largest ones in the world. Have any of the other ones, from Australia or anywhere in the Pacific, have any of these other reefs dealt with anything like this before in history that we know of?
No, and again, that's why I wonder if this disease is not unintentionally been brought in from the Pacific, where corals are already adapted to it and evolved with it. So as in the Atlantic during normal times, if you see coral disease in these other ocean bodies, typically it's small scale, affecting just a few species, nothing that's reef wide. But there's a lot, nonetheless, that we can learn. The coral restoration community around the world is becoming very collaborative, and so we may find solutions and innovations in Indonesia with the coral reefs there that we can apply here in Florida, and vice versa. The Mesoamerican reef in the Caribbean, some of the folks we work with at the Association of Zoos and Aquariums on this, they're already, starting to work outside of the United States, where, the Caribbean nations are confronting this disease. And we're going to learn things from their experiences down there too.
I'm sure. Have you guys figured out any way to isolate the healthy corals besides, taking them out? Like, can you put bubbles? Is there anything you can put around them to kind of like, if you saw one big cluster, to kind of keep it away from?
Right. No, it's a really good question, Joe. And that has been tried. In fact, as we test ways of treating for the disease, that's exactly what folks are doing. They're putting plastic or whatever barriers around
quarantining your coral, right?
They are quarantining their corals, exactly, and then trying. One of the things that's worked well on a very small scale is taking antibiotics, which is why we're thinking it might be bacterial, mixing them in kind of a paste and just spreading that across the coral. And also probiotics, where you take some of the beneficial microorganisms that live with corals now and mass produce them, and then spread those over the corals too. Those techniques have real promise. The problem is we don't know how to scale that up yet. You can do it coral by coral, but how do you do it across 360 miles? So that'll be one of the bigger challenges as we start restoring the reef.
Interesting. So it's kind of like a vaccine, but
right.
I mean, you obviously can't, and you're not injecting the coral. This is just all still in waterborne, and just is it how it works?
Yeah, and so that's why you need sort of a paste that the water doesn't immediately dissolve, that spreads the antibiotic across the surface and holds it there for a while.
Fascinating. That's so cool.
Yeah. It's a new science. People haven't looked very much at coral diseases, but so many people are doing it now. The Florida Aquarium in Tampa is doing a great job on this. Boat Marine Lab in Sarasota, Florida, University of Miami, Southeastern University, and public agencies like NOAA and DEP and FWC and Smithsonian. There are about 60 public and private agencies, in fact, working on these issues now.
And are you guys at St. Pete? Is that where you guys are based?
Yeah, St. Pete and Tallahassee.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And where do you actually live?
I live in Sarasota, actually.
Okay,
so
cool.
I'm a short commute up to St. Pete for this.
Very nice. Yeah, I guess you're closer to Moat down there. That's a neat place.
It is. It's very neat. Yeah.
Well, I guess the kind of the big final question, how can we all help besides not going down there and touching coral, banging into it, or throwing anchors on the reef?
Sure.
How can we all help? As most of our audience is recreational anglers and boaters. Right. How can we help?
Well, I'd suggest a couple of things, and we certainly appreciate, your audience being aware of this and making others aware of it. That would be number one. Just make people aware of the scale and the scope of this problem. Number two, don't stop fishing. The fish stocks are being carefully managed. This is a long-term problem that it's going to. I knew
I liked you from the get-go. I knew I liked you. Don't stop fishing.
So things are being managed. We just have to bring back the reef. And I'd say number 3, if you're a diver, you're interested in helping with this. We're obviously not there yet, but once we have corals that we want to really reintroduce, we're going to need a lot of volunteers to come down and help us glue corals back onto the reef or into nurseries, where we're testing them and the like. You can stay in the loop on that. If you Google Coral Crew, CREW, you'll come to a page on the FWC website that allows you to sign up for information on this and volunteer opportunities. We're doing a fair amount of work on sponge restoration in South Florida too, and there'll be volunteer opportunities there to help plant sponges out into the shallow bays.
Cool. And so is kind of the epicenter, is it that Miami area? That's where we believe it started, right?
Well, it was first seen, whether it started there or not, it was first seen again off of Miami, and then it spread fast north and south. And of course, the other way people can help, of course, is donations if they're interested in giving. We maintain a special fund for this work on our website, which is at wildlifeflorida.org. Florida spelled out, wildlifeflorida.org. And you can see our Restoring Reefs right there on the homepage, and it'll tell you more information about all this.
Cool. Wildlifeflorida.org. And we'll put some links. I know Michelle had sent 3 different links. There's a couple PDFs and even a couple videos on that.
Yeah.
And to me, that was just helpful because I had heard of it, but as I mentioned when we started the podcast, I wasn't really that familiar with how bad this was. I didn't know it had been going on for 5 years. And I've asked a few people since Michelle first reached out if they knew anything about it. And some did, some have. And these are people who live in Florida, had never even heard of it. So I think a lot of this is going to be, awareness. And it's alarming after reading through some of this. It's just like, wow. And knowing how quickly these, coral colonies are dying off. It is scary. And so I think the stat that I wrote down that was really eye-opening, you said 2%, coral only occupies 2%, yet 25% of the fish that we want to catch, and these saltwater fish are depending on it. Is that right?
Well, 25% of all marine life. It's probably a higher proportion of Florida's game fish, and including spiny lobsters, tarpon, grouper, snapper, hogfish, cobia, pompano. So many fish that depend on the reef at one point in their lives or another. Yeah. So, yeah, one of the things we're hoping to do with Bonefish Tarpon Trust and FWC too is raise some money and to increase expertise around fish habitat, so that other types of habitats that fish depend on, eelgrass beds, for example. Shellfish especially, and I think longer term in conservation, in Florida and other coastal areas, it's going to be all about bringing the habitat back to full health, and in support of the fisheries.
Yeah, well, our listeners support that, so
yeah.
Andy, I really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to come on here.
Thank you. We so appreciate your time.
Share this. This was super helpful. And please tell everyone again, best websites to go learn more, to donate, and to volunteer.
Sure. So if you're interested in volunteering and being in that loop, Google Coral Crew. It'll take you to a page on the FWC website that you can sign up for bulletins. And our website is wildlifeflorida.org.
Yep. And you'll see, if you look up Stony coral tissue or Stony coral disease, you'll see quite a few articles and some PDFs and some of the updates on the studies. And then if you're on our site, we always keep everything at saltstrong.com/podcast. And you'll see this interview with Andy along with the video, because I know a lot of you listen in your cars. You'll see the video footage, and you'll see the really cool backdrop that Andy has behind him with his coral condos. And then we'll also put links to everything where you can learn more and hopefully volunteer as well once that opportunity is is upon us. So I really appreciate all you guys are doing there for all of us anglers. I think it's easy to take for granted, how amazing we have it as anglers to be able to go out there any weekend we want to. There's some countries where you don't have that freedom and that liberty just to go out there, and you guys are doing so much behind the scenes to keep the waterways healthy and the water healthy, and of course our reef systems and fisheries healthy. So we appreciate it.
Well, Joe, thank you. And yeah, it's all about keeping Florida being the world capital for recreational sport fishing, and we're confident we will.
Yes. Cool. Thanks, guys. And if you have any questions for either of us, I will make sure on that saltstrong.com/podcast. If you go on that link at the very bottom, you'll see a place you can leave any questions or thoughts, ideas, or if you happen to have some cure for this disease that you've been holding out this entire time, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So that's all at saltstrong.com/podcast. Andy, I appreciate it. Have a great rest of the week. And thank you guys for staying with us. Talk to you in the next episode.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.